I think everything's conceptual.
Okay. So I think I don't think we can know for certain if something can exist or if we exist or something exists, but we have to kind of assume it is anyway to in order to exist. So yeah,
We don't have to have certainty to have knowledge.
yeah, I agree. I agree with that.
That's why I say we start with intuitions.
Could you
And intuitions aren't
elaborate
going to
on
be
that?
axiomatic. Huh?
Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, like an intuition is just going to be like an intellectual appearance of some kind. So it's going to be like a mental event. Um, and it's just going to be like where like a proposition or like a set of propositions like appear to be true upon grasping each proposition, like conceptually. Um, and the reason I'd say start there is just because like in the absence of defeaters, that itself is going to be enough justification to make an inference from what appears to be true or not true. Because what else do we start with? Should we start with what doesn't appear to be true, or what, like might appear to be true, or might not appear to be true? I think it's better to start with what like appears to be true upon grasping the proposition.
I feel like to do that you kind of have to be going for a absolute logic. Well, I would say fundamentally we can't really know or anything, or I think you could make separate logics that all theoretically are the have the same value, but only one of those is the one that's actually applicable to us.
Yeah, but that's why I said like logic is like expansive. So like the goal is like taking like cognitive, like manifolds by using like these like polysyllogistic aggregates, and that's always going to be like a disjunctive process, which is why we can have like things like temporal logic and intuitionistic logic and stuff like that. Because I mean, at least in like a Kantian sense, like you're sort of creating unity out of like unorganized like sense impressions through intuition. So if you think of like if you're perceiving like things, you have like object A, B, C, D, they're going to be like disjoined, but in experience they're conjoined. So like cognition is like unifying them. It's like a manifold that's unified into like one whole. So you're just taking like a bunch of syllogisms and like smashing them together and making rules out of it. And that's what logic is, and that's like a disjunctive process, at least on my view. But it's not going to be like axiomatic.
Hmm. How would you explain the fact your logic is objective? What makes it objective?
It's just the fundamental nature of reality. Like I said, like reason has a telos, so I think that like where like our consciousness is just like a disassociated fragment of like a larger mind that we live in. So the external world is like a mind, and we're living in the mind, and everything that we see and experience is just representations and thoughts within this mind. But it's like a
Is
disassociated mind, not operating off
is
of like.
the
Hmm?
is it esse percipi or something?
I didn't hear what you said.
Isn't like the Latin phrase esse est percipi or something that what this kind of began with, right? Like being is to be perceived or something.
No, that's like Berkeley. I don't agree with that. He's
Yeah.
like a subjective idea. He thinks that like reality is dependent on our mind. I don't think that. I think
No,
reality
no,
is.
no, no, no. He also has this idea, right, that there is like the God mind, right? That actually, like the question is, what happens in a room when nobody is there to perceive it, right? He would say, like God is perceiving it.
Yeah, but where it doesn't exist. This is like the issue. Like it doesn't
Wait, but it
exist
does
until we
exist.
perceive.
But you don't think a room that you aren't looking at exists?
No, I don't think. I'm saying that's what Berkeley thinks, from my understanding, because he's a subjective
Okay.
ideal.
No,
I don't think.
he thinks that God is like the mind that perceives everything all the time, right? And that's why things do exist within this mind, right? Just like they exist within your mind when you perceive them, right? Like their coherence is kept up by this bigger mind, right? That's all encompassing.
Yeah, I promise you. Like, from my understanding of Berkeley, he's literally saying that like the existence of like material things are not independent of our mind. They're just perceptions. Don't all. All he's saying is like if we're not perceiving it, it doesn't exist, and that's like really bad.
Yeah, I thought he said something differently.
Like I think there is an external world that exists independently of our minds, but I think the nature of
But
that external world is, yeah, I think the nature of it is mental rather than physical. Because
like within
Uh,
God, then, right?
yeah, like we're in the mind of God. All of reality is like the mind of God.
so you think
Sounds a
all
lot like
minds
Berkeley to
are
me.
connected?
What?
So you think all minds are connected in some way?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Um, how
The only
would
good
you
crit-
go around proving that?
well, the only good well, first of all, I mean, I think it's pretty intuitive, but I think the only good critique of that would be like some like interaction problem, which I mean, there's a lot of answers to like all forms of like interaction problems. Um, like you could say there's like some like gnomic relation, which is the same way in like a realist gnomic relation. Like a theist, for example, could hold that like God is omnipotent, and the relation is going to be like if God wills X, X occurs. That's going to be like the gnomic relation between like the non-physical and the physical. For like for like a theist could say that. Basically, there's all different types of ways to answer, interaction problems. Like, oh, if our minds are connected, how come I can't access your mind? You know, it's just going to be some gnomic like actualization, which means it's like in accordance with some sort of like process that's like a law of nature.
Okay, so could you just try? I understood what you said to some extent. Could you just actively try to talk a bit simpler?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
basically, like, yeah, the interaction problem. You could ask the same thing for like the physicalist. It's going to be overdetermined, which means it's going to basically. Do you know like what causal closure is?
No, no.
So it's just going to be like a principle that like precludes overdetermination of events, and you can use that to attack like physicalist interactions, how do like two materials interact or two material things interact. Do you
Mm-hmm.
know what overdetermination is?
No, I'm not familiar. I have a very basic understanding of philosophy, so most specific things you ask me about, I'm probably not going to know them.
Yeah, for something that happens, there's like different like multiple causes. Like there could be like a set of causes that could explain that.
Okay.
Uh, that's basically the issue with overdetermination.
Mm-hmm.
So none of them are going to be
So
like sufficient to
this is
explain.
the philosophy of like existence.
Yeah, yeah, it's just
Do you think
metaphysics.
morality is also objective then?
Yeah, yeah, of course.
So,
Yeah.
And
so
how
if,
would you
if
come to
I'm,
that?
I'm sorry, if I'm getting you correctly here, we don't physically exist. We're all just part of some god mind. Is that what you're saying, Zetrin?
Yeah, I don't think anything physically exists.
But it's a pretty good fake, isn't it? I mean, I experience that I exist. I look around. There's sensation. There's like it's a perfect forgery.
What do you mean a perfect forgery?
Like I appear to be existing. It's very
Yeah.
convincing.
What are you trying to say?
I'm just saying, like, isn't it more reasonable to conclude that I do exist physically?
No, I'm not saying you don't exist. I'm saying nothing physical exists.
Right. I'm saying, isn't it more logical to conclude that I do exist physically?
Oh no, not at all. I mean, if you think about it, like if we're creating this separate like ontological category that we're defining like physical, we're calling like physical or material, and that those sort of things are like non-experiential. They're quantitative, not qualitative. How they're defined. So the problem is like you're gonna have to try and reduce your qualitative experience to this separate, category that you're creating that you can't really ever have, knowledge of in any complete sense. Whereas I'm saying we should just start with what we already know exists which is our conscious experience, and say, well, okay, the external world is just going to be a broader conscious experience that we're a part of. And our consciousness is just a disassociated version of this larger consciousness that we're a part of. So everything we experience and perceive and we sense and we touch, we taste, we smell, all of that is just going to be, qualitative aspects of this larger mind. They're just going to be experiential aspects of this mind, but nothing physical. I don't think there's any reason to believe that the things that we perceive in the world around us are physical rather than mental.
When you're
I think
saying
it's
the world is a perfect fake, you're kind of assuming you're faking something, but this is more about the existence of existence and less about the assimilation or something.
Wait,
I'm
but
not
can
faking.
I ask, like, wouldn't the other way around just be as valid, right? To say, I know the mind exists, right? But that doesn't mean, like, we can also assert, the mind is just a material thing, right? And then, not two substances exist, right? But, it's all material, right? That would also kind of solve the issue, no?
I think you'd have to bridge a lot of gaps there. One of them would be the classic like is ought gap. So like a descriptive state, something that we can like measure and things like that, is never going to be like identical to a normative state, which means like the normative state's just going to be some like action guiding force, which means that like it's going to be like if something's normative, then you'll have a reason to do it, and that reason is independent of your mind, and it's informing you of how to act, independent of how you feel or what you want to do. A good example of this is like, say you're driving past a forest and you see smoke coming from the forest. Like you have a reason to believe that the forest is on fire, regardless of whether or not you want to believe it's on fire. So that reason for belief, the question is that reason dependent on your mind and what you want and what you desire? I wouldn't think so because it's informing you of how to believe, independent of what you want to believe. And so basically, the idea there is just like if, like physicalist accounts of mind is going to be a gap. Is going to be a gap that's hard to bridge because if we can show that some of our mental states are normative, then they're never going to be identical to a physical state, which would be a descriptive state, because you can never bridge that gap between descriptive and normative states in terms of identity. There would definitely be a relation, right? Like if someone hits your head, it's going to affect your consciousness, but that doesn't mean that they're identical, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I get that, right? But I think, like, isn't it kind of a jump to say, since, I only want one substance, that would mean that everything that is true about my substance needs to be true about all the other substances, right? Like,
Yeah,
just to say, since my mind can have moral claims, right, it means that everything else also kind of is in line with that aspect of my mind, right? There can only be one substance, right? But that doesn't mean that all substances kind of have the same states, right?
yeah. At that point, it's just going to be like an issue with like what theory is going to be more virtuous, and so obviously we can't escape like skepticism. We can't escape our own conscious experience. Can't make claims about your conscious experience versus mine. But I just say that it's more parsimonious to accept that the external world beyond us is a mind, rather than creating some separate category. Because the only thing that I have direct access to is my mind and my qualitative aspect of my experience. None of my experience is quantitative. None of the things that I experience, it can be reduced to quantities, right? Like it's all qualitative. So if we remove all of that, what is left? That's the question.
Yeah,
And then
right.
there's
But I mean, to say to wonder what is more virtuous, right, isn't really like a, how do you say, really searching for the truth, right? This kind of wondering what is more virtuous, right?
Could you
Because
yeah.
clarify?
the truth.
Yeah,
Could you
well,
clarify what you mean by virtuous in this specific example?
yeah, it's just referring to like theoretical virtues. So if we have like a set of theories, there's going to be different things that would like count in that would point like favor towards the theory. So basically, we're going to have like prescriptions that we adopt that are in relation to some sort of like hypothetical norm, and that hypothetical norm is accounting in favor of relation for one theory over another, and that set of prescriptions is going to reduce down to theoretical virtues, which would be things like parsimony, explanatory power, and then within those you have like different branches of each of those and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Like explanatory power, you have like breadth and depth, and like there's a lot of different conceptions of these things, but this is like currently being like talked about still. There's no answer for any of this stuff. It's just because even that itself is a theory about theoretical virtues, and then that would have theoretical virtues, and then at some point, it's and this is why I like people who just say we get caught up in language. Language is our fundamental like issue. You know, I like that idea.
Maybe. Maybe. Yeah, language. Do you think then that language changes the way people think?
There's so many different things with regarding like language. I mean, one of the first things is like language is like when we're using terms, that's just going to be referring to concepts. But there's more to like what the concept means than just the referent. If that makes sense. Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. So a lot of people have said it's Frege said it's like this extra component called sense. There's a lot of different theories about that, but there's definitely it's like widely accepted there's going to be more to meaning than like the referent of a term. I don't think meaning consists solely in reference. Because if it did, then how could people who have the same referent come to understand it in different ways?
But do any two people have the same referent?
Yeah, I mean, like this is the thing with like the morning star and the evening star, like that sort of analogy. I don't
But
know if
if you
you're
take
familiar.
into account all of the things, all of the personal feelings about things, like if a person has a different experience with the morning star, like they would have a different reference to it.
Are you saying if they have a different experience of the morning star?
Yeah, the way you personally experience language also probably isn't going to be completely universal.
Yeah, I mean the way that Frege talks about it, from what I remember, it's been a while, is like how we come to understand like the morning star. Well, it's like a star in the sky. It's really bright. It has a certain location that we can identify every night. So if you're a person from one culture and you know the meaning of the word morning star, how do you know it? Well, it's because there's like a reference. It's going to be up there in the sky. And then like let's say there's like a species of aliens that you come across and you ask them like what's your favorite star? And they say the evening star, and I'll be like, I don't know what that means, but that's like the issue because the evening star is going to be referentially identical to the morning star, but you don't understand the meaning of what they're saying when they say, my favorite star is the evening star, because you've come to understand it as a morning star, even though it's referentially identical because it's like a fact of reality exists.
Hmm.
So the question is like, if meaning consists solely in reference, how can it be the case that there's two people who mean the same thing by referring to the same object, but at the same time one person's incapable of understanding the meaning of the term?
In what way can't they understand the term?
Because there's more to meaning than reference. Um, some people would say like there's going to be an extra component. One of the concepts, it's a tricky concept, but basically we have this idea of sense. So you could describe that as like the mode of presentation or like the cognitive content of a word. There's like you can go in depth about like those nitty details about it, but I think everyone can have like a rough understanding of what sense means. It's basically the way that like someone comes to know the reference of the word. So when I say like the morning star is beautiful, and they say like the evening star is beautiful, the fact that I can't understand the other sentence is because there's more to meaning than just the reference, and that's because like the sense of evening star is different from the sense of morning star. So as long as two people have the same sense of a word, which would mean they have the same reference because sense is something that maps onto the same reference, then they would have like the same understanding.
Well, I think we assume people have the same reference, but there are definitely some occasions where you might think you have the same understanding of a thing, where it might not actually be true.
Yeah. Well, like think about it, like if we say like the morning star is bright, and then we say like the evening star is bright, like the meaning of each sentence is determined by the meaning of the words, and that's pretty intuitive. So like each of the expressions is like a component of a greater sentence. So the morning star has a meaning, and the concept is bright has a meaning. So we can join like those two expressions together into like a further expression, which is the sentence. And the idea is like that further expression and the meaning of it consists in the meaning of the two component parts of the sentence. So like I'm capable of understanding the morning star, but not capable of understanding the evening star. But if meaning consists solely in reference, then the meaning of those two statements are going to be identical, which they're not. So that view of meaning, is absurd because I can have like two sentences whose meaning is purely identical, but at the same time, like I said, like two people can't understand those two sentences because it's possible that I've never even heard of the Evening Star, if that makes sense.
Okay. So, like, if
Yeah,
somebody doesn't know what the evening star is, they can't really relate to that statement.
yeah, it is because of the sense. They don't have the sense of like the meaning of the component parts of the statement because each concept is going to be its own have its own meaning, and then the sentence that they're making is also going to have its own meaning. So like the
Hmm.
reference is going to be something out there in the world. When I say like the blue cup in front of me, the referent is the cup in front of me. But the sense, they would say like, Frege would say like the sense exists like the reference does, but not in the physical world or the mental world.